You were born carrying a secret that you forgot the instant you learned to say your own name. Before that, before words, before labels, there was only pure presence, a boundless consciousness, observing the world through eyes that didn't yet know they were yours. This is the first lie you accepted without realizing it, the idea that you are a body with a name, a history, a profession, a set of beliefs inherited from people who had also forgotten who they truly were. You did not come into the world as a supporting character in a script written by others. You came as a spark of something infinite, temporarily compressed within a physical experience, to feel, to learn, to remember. And it is precisely this memory, the memory of your own divine nature, that the system you live in was designed to erase. Think for a moment about how this happens. A child is born and in the first months of life doesn't yet know how to separate where their own body ends and the world begins. There is no I and other. There is only direct experience, unfiltered, non-judgmental, fearless. But then come the names. Your name is this. You are a boy or a girl. You are the child of so-and-so. You were born into this family, this country, this religion. Each of these phrases, spoken with love or indifference, begins to build a cage around something that originally had no limits. And the most disturbing thing is that this cage is not made of iron. It is made of words, expectations, comparisons of, you don't do that. That's not for you. Be realistic. Gradually, the child who was once pure presence transforms into an adult who can only recognize themselves through labels. I am a teacher. I am a father. I am divorced. I am someone who failed in a certain area. I am someone who wasn't lucky. And here is the point that few dare to say out loud. None of these phrases are you. They are masks you learned to wear so early, and for so long that you came to believe the face behind the mask no longer exists. The ancients, however, knew something that modernity tried to forcefully erase with rigid doctrines, and a materialism that reduces human beings to a heap of cells reacting by chance. In ancient Egypt, priests built entire temples around a central idea. Human beings contain within them a spark of the same force that organizes the stars. The myth of Osiris, dismembered and then reunited by Isis to be reborn, was not just a story about a dead god. It was a metaphor for the very human process of fragmentation and reintegration. We are born whole. We are torn apart by life, by losses, by masks, and the spiritual path is precisely the process of gathering these pieces and bringing to life something that seemed definitively dead within us. In Greece, the myth of Prometheus told something similar in a different guise. The fire stolen from the gods and given to men was not just technology or practical knowledge. It was the very spark of creative consciousness, that which makes us capable of shaping reality and not just suffering it. And the texts attributed to Jesus, when he stated before his accusers, "You are gods," was not committing blasphemy or rhetorical exaggeration. He was repeating, in other words, what Egyptian priests, Greek philosophers, and mystics from various traditions had already taught. Divinity is not an exclusive privilege of a distant figure in heaven. It is a dormant seed within every human being who walks the earth, waiting to be recognized. The problem is that these messages have, over the centuries, been reinterpreted, distorted, and used for the exact opposite of what they intended. Instead of inviting people to recognize their own creative power, many power structures realized it was easier to control a population convinced of its smallness, its powerlessness, its dependence on intermediaries to access the sacred. And so teachings that originally pointed inward, "The kingdom is within you, know thyself, ye are gods," were slowly replaced by systems that pointed outward. Obey, fear, wait, do not question. This is why, when you look within yourself today and feel a kind of emptiness, a sense that something is missing even when everything is fine on the surface, it is not a flaw of yours. It is the genetic memory of something you once were, and that social conditioning has strived generation after generation to make you forget. And here modern science, curiously, began to knock on the very same door that ancient mystics knocked on. The physicist and engineer Itzhak Bentov, while studying altered states of consciousness and the relationship between vibration, matter, and perception, described something remarkable. The more refined and coherent a human being's consciousness becomes, the more it seems to cease being merely a spectator of physical reality and begin to interact directly with it. Bentov was not talking about fantasy. He was describing, in the language of physics, something that ancient traditions already described in the language of myth. There is a bridge between the observing mind and the observed world, and this bridge is not passive. Quantum physics, decades after its initial formulations, brought one of the greatest philosophical shocks in the history of science by demonstrating, in repeated experiments, that subatomic particles behave differently depending on whether they are being observed or not. The simple act of observation alters the outcome. Stop and feel the weight of that for a moment. Science, at its most fundamental level, has begun to confirm that consciousness is not a passive witness to the universe. It actively participates in the construction of what manifests as reality. Neuroscience, in turn, has revealed something equally disturbing for those who still believe they are helpless victims of circumstances. The human brain does not distinguish with absolute clarity between a lived experience and a vividly imagined experience. When you imagine with real sensory details a situation, be it a fear or a desire, your nervous system releases chemical substances very similar to those that would be released if that were actually happening. Your body, in other words, begins to live the future your mind is drawing, long before that future manifests externally. This means that imagination is not simple mental entertainment, a harmless daydream to fill moments of boredom. Imagination is, literally, the most powerful and most underestimated tool that exists within a human being, because what you visualize and feed repeatedly, with emotion and conviction, begins to become the internal mold from which your external experience is built. It is as if, within you, there exists an invisible sculptor, working tirelessly, day and night, shaping a block of raw possibilities, according to the images you visit most often in thought. The inevitable question is, what kind of sculpture have you been building without realizing it, simply by repeating every day the same scenes of fear, scarcity, of I am not capable? Here we arrive at one of the most uncomfortable points of this awakening journey. If imagination is indeed such a powerful creative force, why does the majority of people seem to use it against themselves, repeatedly producing scenarios of failure, illness, rejection, scarcity? The answer is simple and at the most devastating, because human imagination is rarely under the control of its owner. It is most of the time being hijacked by external forces that discovered long ago that controlling what a population imagines is the most efficient and most silent way to control what that population desires, fears, and buys. Turn on the television, open any social network, and you'll be diving into an ocean of carefully crafted images designed to plant specific seeds in your imagination. The image of a body you should have, a life you should aspire to, an imminent danger you should fear, a product that will fill a void that, in fact, was artificially created by advertising itself. Modern advertising doesn't sell products. It sells prefabricated imagination. It delivers ready-made, the scenes you will mentally replay without even realizing they weren't your original ideas, but rather carefully designed implants by those who deeply understand the creative power you yourself are unaware you possess. Fear works in the same way, and perhaps even more effectively. A system based on constant catastrophe news, on algorithms that prioritize the most alarming content because it generates more engagement, keeps entire populations trapped in a state of permanent alert, repeatedly imagining scenarios of danger, scarcity, and chaos. And remember what has already been said. The body does not clearly differentiate between vivid imagination and real experience. A human being who spends hours a day consuming content that makes them imagine disasters, betrayals, losses, and threats is, on a biochemical level, repeatedly living through these disasters, even if they never physically happen. And while this person is too busy imagining the worst, they simply don't have any internal space available to imagine, with the same emotional intensity, the life they truly wish to live. This is the most sophisticated prison ever built, a prison without visible bars, which operates by hijacking the only tool that could free the prisoner. Reclaiming this tool, however, requires no supernatural power nor decades of esoteric study. It simply demands conscious and repeated practice, just as any muscle that has been neglected for years needs to be trained again, little by little, with patience. There is a simple, almost silent ritual that ancient traditions in different parts of the world, in distinct ways, have always practiced. Setting aside a moment of the day, preferably upon waking or before sleeping, to step away from external noise. No temple is needed, no decorated altar is required. Silence is all that's needed. Sit, breathe deeply, and allow the automatic thoughts, those that normally dominate your mind without you realizing it, to begin to slow down. Then, look yourself in the mirror, eye to eye, without judgment, simply observing. Most people avoid this simple act because deep down they are afraid of what they might find there, a tired face, aged by the masks they have worn for so long. But it is precisely in this encounter, eye to eye with your own reflected image, that the first crack in the armor of imposed identities begins to form. Then pronounce in a low voice or just in thought affirmations that reconnect you with your true nature, not empty mechanical phrases repeated without feeling anything, but words spoken with the intention of someone who is, in fact, remembering something they have always known. I am more than this body. I am more than this story I've been told about myself. I carry within me the same force that organizes the stars, the oceans, the seasons. Then allow yourself to visualize, with the maximum possible sensory detail, the life you wish to build, not as a desperate plea directed at an external force, but as the anticipated memory of something already in the process of manifesting through you. And conclude with detachment, releasing the anxious need to control every detail of the how and the when, trusting that once the seed has been planted with clarity and genuine emotion, the growth process itself will follow its natural course. Just as you don't need to order a tree seed needs to grow, you just need to offer it the right conditions. But there's a final obstacle, perhaps the most difficult of all, that prevents many people from completing this journey back to their own inner divinity, the shadow. That part of yourself that has been rejected, hidden, repressed since childhood because it was deemed wrong, shameful, or too dangerous to be shown to the world. The anger you learned to swallow, the desire you learned to hide, the ambition that was called arrogance, the sensitivity that was called weakness. All these parts don't disappear when they're suppressed. They just retreat to an inner basement, from where they continue to silently influence decisions, relationships, and repetitive patterns of self-sabotage. There's an ancient symbolic figure that powerfully represents exactly this dynamic. Judas, the disciple who betrayed. For centuries he has been treated merely as a villain, the personification of pure betrayal. But in a deeper symbolic reading, Judas represents that part of every human being that is also capable of betraying, of failing, of acting out of fear or greed, the dark part that everyone carries and that most prefer to pretend doesn't exist. True awakening doesn't happen when someone pretends to be perfect, enlightened, and flawless. It happens at the exact opposite moment, when a person finally has the courage to look at their own inner Judas, at that part that betrays, that errs, that hides in the shadow, and instead of continuing to reject that part, chooses to embrace it as a legitimate and necessary part of their wholeness. Only after this honest confrontation does integration become possible. And it is only through this integration that one stops being a fragmented character, divided between the mask they show to the world and the shadow they hide from themselves, to finally become the conscious and whole author of their own existence. You don't need external permission to start this process. You don't need to wait for a sign from heaven, a crisis that forces you to change, or the validation of others who have also forgotten who they are. The call is already within you, latent, waiting, since the day you traded the pure presence of a baby for the first masks you learned to wear. Every time you notice an automatic thought of fear and consciously choose to replace it with an image that strengthens you, you will be exercising the creative muscle that almost everyone has forgotten they possess. Every time you refuse to accept as definitive an identity that was imposed on you by others, be they parents, teachers, bosses, or an entire society based on comparison and scarcity, you will be taking a step back toward your true nature. And every time you have the courage to look at your own shadow without running from it, you will be doing exactly what the ancient masters, disguised in myths, symbols, and parables, tried to teach for millennia, that the path to the sacred was never outside of you, in a distant temple or in an external authority figure, but has always been silently, waiting, within the very mirror you avoid truly looking into. You are not just a body trying to survive another day within a system that benefits from your forgetting. You are an infinite consciousness, temporarily disguised as human, learning through matter and time to remember what you have always been.